The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Dylan J. Schlender presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Schlender.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus Forrest Gump, a 1994 drama that follows the titular Gump through recent American history as he tells tales of his time growing up in the South, his service in Vietnam, and much, much more. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Maynard Bangs, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Judge Dylan. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, hi, my name is Maynard Bangs. I hope you don't mind if I talk in this voice for the duration of the trial.
I do.
I figured if it didn't annoy the crap out of you after 2.5 hours, what would a few more minutes hurt?
Oh, no.
Who knows? Maybe they'll even give me an Academy Award for my powerhouse performance. And if anyone thinks I'm being uncharitable in my depiction here today, let me assure you that no, this is very accurate to what Forrest Gump sounds like for an entire movie. At no point is it any less offensive than this. Mama always said my accent was like the box of chocolates. Too much of it makes you feel like you gotta go to the bathroom. Well, shucks, here I am, and I gotta prosecute a movie that won 6 Oscars. I never had to prosecute a movie that won 6 Oscars before. I prosecuted lots of kind of movies, though. I prosecuted funny movies and scary movies, sad movies, happy movies, detective movies, space movies, heist movies, sports movies, happy movies, conjoined fetus movies, movies about trains, movies not about trains, even some movies with no trains in them at all. History movies, clown movies, snake movies.
Your Honor!
I'm going to allow this.
That's about it, I guess. Anyway, Judge Dylan, that's all I got to say about that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bangs. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Brooks Eason. Please present your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was listening to the prosecutor's opening, and I was reminded of Jimbo Metter. You may not know who Jimbo Metter was, but Jimbo Metter provided advice about how Forrest Gump should talk in the movie. And Jimbo said, when he was interviewed for a recent article in Garden and Gun, he said, "People have always teased me for how slow I talk. A man said they asked me to be on 60 Minutes, but they couldn't do it because it would have taken an hour and a half." Then he said, Jimbo has had a lot of different jobs in his life, but the one he failed most miserably at was as an auctioneer. So I'm delighted to be here to defend a great, great movie. And I want to thank you, gentlemen, for this assignment, because it gave me the first opportunity, well, not the first opportunity, but I did it for the first time. I watched Forrest Gump again this afternoon for the first time in many years, and what a great, great movie it is. There are different kinds of genius. There are different geniuses. I wrote notes about some geniuses. Gary Larson is a genius, The Far Side. John Prine, the songwriter, was a genius. Mel Blanc, who did all the voices for Warner Brothers cartoons, a genius. Tom Hanks in this movie was a genius. He fit the role perfectly. He played, how hard can it be for a bright actor to play a man with a 75 IQ? But he did it, and it's a great movie, and I cried and I laughed, and there's no reason why it didn't win more than 6 Oscars.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Eason. Mr. Bangs, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Sure. The first thing I'd like to touch on this movie is pretty much universally wherever it's classified, you'll find it classified as a comedy drama, sometimes a comedy romance, but it's always underlined as a comedy slash. So when you think about it at a high level, this is a comedy. And we got to ask ourselves, what are we laughing at most of the time? Most of the time, what we're laughing at is Forrest Gump. He is the punchline. He is the butt of the joke, most especially his obliviousness in any situation, most especially his obliviousness to the significance of the history he's lived through and unwittingly contributed to. So when you think about it, at the bottom line, this is a comedy where we laugh at a developmentally challenged man and his struggles through life. Now, if you hung me for being a nice guy, I'd say you hung an innocent man. But even me, I tend to think that is kind of mean-spirited. This is, I think a friend of mine might say, a minstrel show of the developmentally disabled.
Mr. Eason, would you respond to that? That's a pretty big claim coming from Mr. Bangs.
And cruel.
Yes.
Well, that is Mr. Bangs.
Both
talking
cruel
about.
and unusual.
That's a cruel claim. I will say this about Forrest. Forrest is not bright. There are jokes about him in the movie, but he is the hero of the movie. He saves Lieutenant Dan twice. Both saves him from dying in Vietnam and then saves his life when he comes back and is a disaster. Forrest Gump is low on IQ but huge on heart. He loves people and he cares for them. He cares for Jenny. He's the hero of the movie, and the movie demonstrates that you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be high IQ to be a heroic American who makes a difference in many lives.
Well, I'd like to talk about this stupidity of Forrest, because his stupidity at times is always very convenient. I think what he has is an elastic stupidity. He's as dumb as the writers need to be in that moment. To the point of, not knowing when he's been shot, even though he's gone through months of training and deployment. We see he knows how to hold a gun. He knows what bullets are. Moments later, he tells Bubba, "Oh, Bubba, you've been shot." But we can't help but resist the big laugh when he goes, "Son, bet me!" And we're supposed to laugh at how stupid Forrest is for not knowing the cause of his injury. We laugh at Forrest for not knowing where the end zone is or where it ends in a football game. We're meant to laugh as he charges through the band, even though he's been to months of practices at this time. We're supposed to laugh at how he jumps off of his shrimping boat with the engine running. Now, this is where it's an elastic stupidity. This is not a lived-in stupidity. If Forrest was the type of man to jump off his moving boat with the engine running, he wouldn't have a boat very quickly. Not to mention that in order to run his boat by himself, he's going to need to be some type of mechanic, right? That engine is going to break down, it's get flooded with water. Forrest has to know how to repair that and fix that. Those are all abilities we never see Forrest get. Now, his stupidity is very rarely dangerous. It's a whimsical innocence. It's childlike. I'd like to refer to a great article from Forbes by Kristen Lopez, who is herself a disabled writer. It's called 10 Years of Missing the Point of Tropic Thunder's Thoughts on Mental Disability. And she mostly talks about the portrayal of Simple Jack in Tropic Thunder, but she compares it as a very accurate critique of Forrest Gump. See, Forrest Gump is, this is her quote, "disabled enough to be different from mainstream society, but he's charming, compliant, and childlike so that able-bodied audiences watching his exploits can embrace him. Forrest is just disabled enough to be pitiable, but not so much to make the audience uncomfortable." You see, she argues that Simple Jack, while it's a more authentic portrayal, as uncomfortable as it makes us, other than the varnished ableist depiction written to win awards that we see in Forrest Gump. Ultimately, Forrest Gump is not a disabled person. He's a disabled person who's not disabled because he barely has any difficulty navigating life, which he would. As a low IQ, not only would he have a hard time grasping things, his biggest challenge would be memory. He'd have a difficult time recalling things, which is why it's so ironic that we made a whole movie about a low IQ man recalling all the events of the past 2 decades. The one thing he'd have the most trouble doing.
Mr. Eason, can you respond to the merits of Gump's disability and how it plays into the film, and whether or not it's accurate or appropriate?
I was listening to that, and I was thinking the prosecutor does not like sunsets or full moon.
Damn right. He doesn't like anything but winning.
Walking with his true love with a glass of wine. Where's the magic in his soul? There are some things in this movie that are highly, highly unlikely. No doubt about it. But it's portrays a beautiful person who cares about others. Sure, he's limited.
Is he? Seems to be able to get by just fine.
He's certainly limited. That's part of his charm. When he gets shot, and then LBJ says, "I'd like to see that," and he pulls down his pants. I mean, it's a charming moment for a scene in which an American hero who has saved his comrades in Vietnam is taking something literal when the president meant it figuratively, because he's limited. And that's, there's nothing wrong with having fun with something about that.
Now, people might say, I might agree with you, the movie's inspirational, right? Because it's about Forrest overcoming these challenges and living a very fulfilling life. But like I said, does he? Now, let's look at the first challenge we see presented in the movie. And that's Forrest's leg braces. It's a physical challenge. Forrest is born with a crooked spine, and he receives these leg braces to correct the ailment. And they hinder his ability to both walk and fit in even more so. But mainly, we find out through the course of the movie, he only had these leg braces for a one-note joke where he teaches Elvis how to dance. Once he's done that and he's taught Elvis how to dance, we don't need the leg braces anymore. And they just magically fall off. Does Forrest attend physical therapy and progressively heal his limbs? Do we see Forrest overcoming challenges through persevering? No, he describes it as a miracle. One day the plot no longer needs the magic braces, so they simply fall off. And suddenly Forrest is not only able to walk, he's able to run stronger, preternaturally fast. Even though his legs would have atrophied in those braces, he would have had a hard time walking without those braces. Forget about magically being able to run. This is just one of many, many unearned achievements Forrest has in the film. Even though his legs, like I said, would be atrophied and useless, he becomes this natural athlete who never had to practice at all. And that really robs Forrest of any real accomplishment in his football career. One day he just picked up a football and started running and was great at it. It's the same with ping pong. It's the same with shrimp boat captaining. It's the same that happens throughout the movie. He's sort of a savant. It's that same trope like Rain Man. He's just mystically good at these things because we need some way for him to overcome it, but we're not smart enough as writers to actually think how a man with a 75 IQ could overcome the problems. He just, like a Deus Ex Machina device, magically does.
All right, Mr. Eason, would you like to address how he overcomes these problems?
What a sad little man the prosecutor is.
Stipulated, but these are points about the movie.
What a sad little man he is. And again, Forrest, why must all accomplishments be achieved? Some can happen fortuitously. What is wrong with Forrest being fast as the wind? I wanted to tell this story. Dylan knows this story, but I'll tell this story. It doesn't really help to prove the case, but it's a good story, so I'll tell it. So
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, I do that sometimes. So I had these country cousins in Northwest Mississippi years ago, and it was my ex-wife's brother and his family, and they had kids who were about the same age as our kids. When we went to see them fairly often, and one weekend we went to see them, and a little boy from across the road, you wouldn't call it a street, it was out in the country, from across the road came over to play. And the little boy didn't say anything in particular, but my niece said, Michael was in a movie. And I said, really? That's cool. And I said, what was the name of it? And I suppose he told me the name, but I didn't recognize the name. I'd never heard of Forrest Gump. I'd not read the book. The movie wasn't out yet. And I said, well, that's great. And I said, well, is anybody in it that I would know? And he said, well, there's Mr. Tom Hanks and Miss Sally Fielder in it. And I said, wow, that's really cool. And my niece said, he had to learn to walk in leg braces for that movie. And 6 months later, I'd forgotten all about the conversation. I went to see Forrest Gump with my wife, and the scene comes on with Forrest lying on the examination table in the doctor's office. And I went, well, I'll be damned. That's little Michael from across the road in Northwest Virginia. Yeah. And he's now a retired military veteran. It's been 30 years since the movie was out. So I didn't respond to much of anything you said, but it's a good story. So there it is.
I like how it didn't disagree with anything I said. Now, let's talk about the real history of people like Forrest Gump. You called him a war hero, and in fact, there's a real history of people like this. Now, prior to Vietnam, Forrest actually would have been ineligible to serve, like in Korea and through most of World War II. Due to some issues that the Army, the military in general, experienced with low IQ soldiers, they set a requirement, a legal floor of an IQ of 80 in order to enlist. Now, the sad thing, of course, we know is in Vietnam, they became very desperate for recruits. And so in steps a project called Project 100,000, where the Pentagon basically eased their restrictions for what it would take for someone to enlist in the military. So many individuals, they lowered the requirements to as low as the 10th percentile on the qualification test. Forrest actually would have been eligible to serve at that time. And you might think, oh, great, Forrest can go serve his country. But these restrictions actually exist for a reason, not only for Forrest's protection, but of course, the protection of the men in his platoon. Does Forrest seem capable of a man who can identify an ambush that's coming up? Would he know and be suspicious of people stalking around? He thinks he's playing hide and go seek and looking for a guy named Charlie the whole time. And that's his context when he's telling us 30 years later on a bench. So even after all these years, he still didn't understand what he was actually doing there. And that would jeopardize a lot of men's lives. Now, these guys who were recruited, they were called the New Standards Men. They were also unfortunately referred to as the Moron Corps, a pejorative name, obviously. These men suffered 3 times the casualties of other soldiers. I've also seen the number up to 5 times as many, but 3 was the lowest I saw, so it's what I'm reporting. And many of them did not return home, obviously. The ones who did return home found life much harder than the low IQ non-veterans. Their divorce rates were higher. They had a harder time keeping a steady job, and their salaries were on average lower. So these men who did go, who really had no business being in this war, in the capacity they were at, but were allowed at the last minute, suffered very greatly during this conflict. That is really sugar-coated, glossed over in this movie. Forrest is obviously shown to be this sort of supernatural hero. I mean, yes, what he does is very brave. It's also, as you said, very unlikely that he's going to be able to run and carry all these full-grown men out. But it is probably the best accomplishment Forrest has. I think of in this movie, it's the closest he gets to a legitimate accomplishment that I think he could achieve. Is that proud moment. And it's probably the best part of the movie. But it does carry this dark history that gets glossed over. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, you can check out Hamilton Gregory's book. It's called McNamara's Folly, The Use of Low IQ Troops in the Vietnam War.
Well, I love original research, Maynard. Well done. Brooks, would you care to comment on maybe some of the real-life history that we have versus how we see it in Forrest Gump?
Well, I will say this about that. It appears that the prosecutor's bone to pick is with the government for allowing low IQ soldiers to serve.
Absolutely.
Not with the movie. not every movie has to make important.
Objection. I think that the movie can come out and show this other side and maybe condemn the actions. Nothing in this movie paints that Forrest doesn't belong there or that he's being endangered by allowing it.
Your claim, Mr. Maynard, is that the portrayal in Forrest Gump is just so outside the scope of real life that it's a point in your
It's
favor.
sparkly, sweet, sugary, feel-good, Oscar-baiting nonsense.
Okay, so when you said objection, I guess that gave you the floor to take over and start talking again and then interrupt me. But let me say this: Forrest would not have been a commander. He would not have led a platoon. He could not have been Lieutenant Dan, but he had skills that were very valuable. He was strong. He could run fast. And he saved those men. It was unlikely, and sure, it's not an accurate depiction of what most people of a low IQ probably endured in Vietnam, or most people of a high IQ, frankly. But I don't think it was intended for that. I don't think the movie was intended to let's make the most accurate depiction we can of low IQ soldiers in Vietnam and what they endured. It certainly is a feel-good movie, and it made millions and millions of people feel good, including me.
All right, Mr. Maynard, any other points you'd like to bring up?
I do have one of them is that Tom Hanks actually stipulated before working on this movie that he wanted to be historically accurate. So that actually was a clause in that he was very important to him. And they worked with there's a novel that this is based on. They did work with the author to make sure that some of the time things are right. Still, let's go over some of Schlender's favorite things, the things they get wrong about history. Number one, Apple didn't go public until 1981, so Forrest couldn't have become invested in them and turned into a millionaire in 1975 when they show. In fact, the Apple II, the first mass-produced home computer, but doesn't go on sale until 1977. And the Lisa, which is mentioned in the letter, wouldn't be released until 1983. So Forrest miraculously becoming rich based on that, not going to happen. The smiley face logo was also popularized in the mid-'60s when it was used for buttons, so there's no way Forrest inspired it in the late 70s when he was running across country. Forrest also leaves for his cross-country run. He claims it takes him 3 years and 2 months, but he leaves during Jimmy Carter collapsing from heat exhaustion, which is in October 1979. We show him later when he receives the letter from Jenny during the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, which is 1981. So Forrest could only maximum have been running for a year and 6 months. These are easy maths that they could have done and easily figured out, but they didn't care to. They were just too lazy. Also, if he had met George Wallace in 1963 and then went on the All-American team, that team wouldn't have been announced till December. Kennedy would have already been dead for a month. He wouldn't have possibly been able to meet him. Now, those are silly little nitpicky accuracy things, but they're easy things to get right. But let's talk about the inaccuracies that I think is not so innocent. This film got a lot of flack when it came out for being quote-unquote too conservative, or was accused of being a conservative movie. I don't actually associate conservative movie with bad movie, so I'm not going to say, oh, it's a conservative movie, it's bad. But I do think it has a very particular anti-counterculture stance to it. One of the scenes that really bothers me is their depiction of the Black Panther Party, right? Which is a group of angry black men in a room shouting and basically portraying black rage. Now, in the 70s, the Black Panther Party was actually 2/3 women. And it was mostly female. For instance, Elaine Brown is the chairwoman of the Black Panther Party from 74 to 77. Huey P. Newman gave a famous speech in 1970 where he spoke in solidarity with the women and gay rights movement. So the Black Panther Party was an outspoken ally of the women's rights movement. To think that these guys are going to tolerate that SDS prick slapping around his girlfriend in their meeting, maybe they'd kick Forrest out, but they're kicking that guy out too. But instead, he's allowed to say, and I got to say, they come off as a little villainized. All of the counterculture and protest stuff, they all come off as sort of dopey, dumb hippies, right? Abby Hoffman especially, the guy who's on the stage screaming the F word is Abby Hoffman, is really portrayed as like a burnout, foul-mouthed hippie, right? It's not a flattering portrayal. Jenny essentially is the representative of this entire sort of rebellious spirit, which is indicative of this whole decade. To think that we're going to cover this decade and gloss over that rebellious spirit, Jenny, who represents it, is punished throughout the movie. Almost like the filmmakers say, see, you rebel, you strike out, and you fail. You become a drug addict, you become a prostitute, you become all these terrible things. And here's Forrest, who does nothing but play by the rules and listen, and here's the whole world given to him on a platter. It was flack that they received and critiqued at the time. In the very least, I think it's a very unnuanced look at the time. And why that's important is we're seeing that history through an unnuanced lens. It's Forrest Gump. He doesn't understand very much of what he's seeing, the relevance of it. He can't understand the nuance. So viewing the film through his lens is a particularly useless way to view history.
All right, and are you going to rest on that, Mr.
I'll
Maynard?
rest on that. Sure, why not?
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to respond to a few things that he said, and gosh, he sure got over that slow talking start. I was having a hard time keeping up with him, but because he talks faster than I hear. You know, I'm an old man. Let me say a few things. One is he ticked off a bunch of historical issues, and then he described himself as little nitpicky things. So I don't guess I should spend a lot of time nitpicking his nitpicky.
Well, other than that, Forrest couldn't become a millionaire that way. But.
I will say this about the history. I think it's fun that they have these vignettes with three presidents and tying things to current events. I think that's a fun touch. I also think and maybe the prosecutor will point out some flaws in this, but it seemed to me that the music, which is one of the wonderful things about the movie, that the music was very temporally appropriate. You know, as the movie moves forward in time, so does the music. You know, we have great 60s song during Vietnam, and then later on we have Bob Seger, and that is obviously temporally appropriate, and I like that. In terms of the running, I don't know if it could have been 1.5 years or 3.5 years, and it's kind of a goofy thing. The whole idea that Forrest is going to go run across America and then run back across America and then run back across America. It is highly improbable. But one thing that I liked about that is the beauty of the country, and there are different scenes. You know, there's a fall colored leaves scene. There's running across the desert. There's a beautiful mountain lake, and I think that makes it an American movie even more than it otherwise would be. I wasn't taking notes because I couldn't, because he was talking too fast. So I don't remember what else I might respond to.
How about the depiction of the Black Panther Party or the counterculture of the time?
You know, I'm not a student really of the Black Panther Party to know how much they were up on women's rights. You know, that was a scene in the movie. Maybe it wasn't accurate. I have no idea. I took from the scene that primarily that Forrest was there for Jenny, and he saw her boyfriend slap her, and he wasn't going to stand for that. He didn't. What the Black Panthers would have done, maybe they would have kicked them all out. I don't know.
So I have a question from the bench, and either one of you can take it because I kind of think it's the elephant in the room. Is Forrest Gump a reliable narrator?
You know, Your Honor, I wanted to come out here and go, hey, maybe Forrest is sitting on this bench lying and making everything up. The problem is he pulls a magazine right out of his briefcase that shows him, I think, on Fortune with Lieutenant Dan. And so he's got credibility. There's an artifact right there that he can point to. These things happened. Then he meets Jenny afterwards. Jenny says, hey, what was it like in Vietnam? You know, I saw you on the news running across the country. I got to say, if the argument is Forrest is lying or making these things up or misremembering, that isn't really what the film shows. You know, we see him later, you know, at Jenny's gravestone. We see him with little Forrest. These things seemingly happened.
Yeah, I think I believe Forrest was a very accurate historian. You know, people with limited IQ can have remarkable memories. He's a savant type character, and he was too innocent to fabricate, too innocent to be making stuff up for the people on the park bench. So I believe everything Forrest said happened.
I would like to make one objection there. The one thing that the low IQ, as I said earlier, would make Forrest, it would affect his memory. So people with low IQs notoriously have very poor memories. That's one of the worst symptoms of it.
I would think if you want to present that point, you'd need to have an expert witness, and you don't have one.
I'll go pull another quote. I'll get you an exact link. But
I'm sure there's a Wikipedia article out there somewhere. Mr. Eason, and are there any other points you'd like to make in defense of the film?
I just, I think it's a great movie. I mean, I had not watched it in many years until this afternoon. And as I said, I laughed and I cried. And Tom Hanks is masterful. I told Carrie, she watched it with me today, my wife. I told her, I said, I remember that I loved the movie, but I tried to watch it with a more critical eye today. And I came to have a greater appreciation of just how much it is his movie. You know, other people could have played some of those supporting roles, but he was masterful. And how hard must that be to change your voice and change your IQ and change the way you walk, change the way you stand, change your facial expressions. He was great, and it's a great movie.
All right. Would you like to rest on that, or is there anything else you would like to present about any of the other actors or plot points or anything to that effect?
You know, Gary Sinise is terrific, and you know he plays the role of the man that Forrest saved twice. Sally Field's role is not big, but she's the sweet, lovely mother with this child. You know, raising a child by herself in a boarding house and he's low IQ. He has curvature of the spine and has to wear leg braces, but she's always there for him. It's I guess it's pronounced Michaelta Williams.
Michael T.
Michael T. Okay. All right. I'll defer. I don't know about that. Anyway,
Ryan knows movies. I trust him.
Yeah, he's he's great as Bubba, and I noticed that you were copying all the movies you've critiqued from all the shrimp he's cooked, but he's excellent in that role. I'm really kind of surprised. You said it was conservative, but you know it could be portrayed as racist because McCarthy, he doesn't play a really bright guy either. He and Forrest bond, probably at least in part, over the fact that neither one of them is destined for great academic achievement. I just think it's a great movie, and I thank you for having me on here, if for no other reason than it made me watch the movie again.
All right, and you'd like to rest there?
I rest there.
All right.
I will say, I one response to that. I do like Gary Sinise's performance, but ultimately his character is sort of just a parody or rehash of Born on the 4th of July, almost to a humorous extent, right? It's kind of like a one-note joke. Like when he's getting pushed across the street and he hits the taxi, he says, "Hey, I'm walking here," even though he's not walking. It's really just there so they can make a few easy crack jokes. It exists as a comedy. We never really get to the ultimate suffering of what Lieutenant Dan goes through because Forrest can't understand it. Therefore, we can't.
Well, I would say you can see through Lieutenant Dan's, through Sinise's portrayal of Lieutenant Dan, the suffering he's gone through. You know, the scene in the hospital where he has Forrest pinned down and says he was supposed to die, and you know, why did you save me? I mean, he's endured a great deal. A lot of his men were killed. He thought he should have been killed with them. And it's very sweet at the end when he shows up with his fiance at the wedding, and he's got, that's all thanks to Forrest.
All right. All sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Bangs, you may begin.
In lieu of a closing, here are my top 5 rejected ideas for Forrest Gump as made up by me.
Oh,
Number
no.
1, teenage Forrest gets a summer job in a grocery store and is asked to help reach some cans on a high shelf. Unable to reach, Forrest instead hands the customer a can from a lower shelf, insisting they'll like this kind better. It's a can of tomato soup. The customer, Andy Warhol. Forrest, number 2. Forrest is visiting the campus of Kent State in May 1970. He makes a bowl of microwave popcorn, which inadvertently sets aflame. At a crucially tense moment in the demonstrations outside, Forrest bursts out the dorm building screaming, "Fire! Fire!"
Jeez.
Number
And
3. Forrest gets a job as a janitor at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. In an effort to make sure the capsule is real neat and clean, he inadvertently gets locked in and ends up orbiting the Earth 103 times, accompanied by a chimpanzee he befriends. This would actually be faithful to the novel, wherein Forrest actually does become an astronaut, because, again, it's silly. He also becomes a pro wrestler and an acclaimed chess player in the novel. He's more of a savant than he is in the movie. Number 4, Forrest stops at 3 Mile Island Nuclear Generating Station because he has to pee. After relieving himself in what he thinks is the bathroom, he pulls the flusher, only for several alarms and klaxons to begin sounding. And number 5, Forrest joins the People's Temple, but doesn't go through with the mass suicide in Jonestown, because I gotten real sick of Kool-Aid. I just wasn't very thirsty, and a good thing too, because that Kool-Aid seemed to make everybody else real sleepy. And that's all I got to say about that.
Oh, man, that's even better than singing. All right. Mr. Eason, please present your closing
Not get carried
argument.
away.
First, let me compliment the prosecutor, not on his argument, which doesn't hold water, but on his accent. Man, he sounds just like
I
Forrest.
told you!
It is good.
Yeah, give us a little more of that.
Well, that's all I got to say about that.
Oh, there you go, man.
It's easy. Give me an Oscar.
Yeah.
Who's Oscar?
And some guys.
So he said nothing to which I should respond because he was talking about something else other than the actual movie. But I will repeat what I've said, that it's a great, big-hearted movie. There may be some minor flaws of historical detail, as the prosecutor focused on, but the bigger picture is this is a great movie about a limited man who became a hero. And sure, some of it is unlikely, but that's what movies are about. Movies are about going to see something that you will enjoy and that will make you feel good. And anybody who goes to see Forrest Gump, except small little sad people, will feel good about it. I felt great about this. I'll close my closing by quoting from Gary Sinise. This is from the recent Garden and Gun article about the filming of the movie, and I highly, highly commend it to you. It's snips of interviews from a bunch of people. Sinise is the biggest actor that they talk to, but it's a number of small actors with smaller roles, and a lot of people in Beaufort, South Carolina, who were involved in the filming, including the guy who owned the shrimp company. His name was Charles Gay, and he said, "Proud of my shrimp being in the movie, but nobody probably knew they were mine. A shrimp is a shrimp." And I'll close with this from Gary Sinise. He says, "So I didn't really know what the others were doing during the filming and couldn't have predicted how it would turn out. It really wasn't until the moment we all saw it together in a small screening room at Paramount. The principal cast members, my wife was there, Robin was there with Sean Penn. I remember when the lights came up after the movie and we all looked at each other with massive smiles because it was damn good and everybody knew it."
All right. Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. That's all I have to say about Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts. Well, maybe. I've all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. You know, my mother always said life was like a plate of haggis. It's not for everyone.
Oh, no.
I wonder who she was referring to, like herself or the bailiff?
No, it's the bailiff.
A lot of questions.
Okay. So this is the first time I have seen Forrest Gump. So, you know, you can take away my cinephile card now. I also haven't seen Scarface. So, you know, whenever we bring that on trial, will probably be the first time.
Huh. We should have done a head-to-head. It would have really checked the boxes.
I applaud the prosecutor for his research, his exhaustive research into this film. I applaud the defender for the love and passion that Forrest himself exudes. Interesting film. I don't think it holds up as well as when it came out. I'm curious how it, I mean, I know it was like made fun of at the time, like everyone was saying life was a box of chocolates at the time it came out, almost like when we were talking about Anthony Hopkins and and Silence of the Lambs, like self-parody almost immediately.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, that was the thing. It was so huge for so long. Yeah, it does loom large.
Ryan, what did you think?
Well, I want to remind everybody listening to this that has seen the motion picture Forrest Gump that this feel-good, treacly movie, the lead character is named after a Klansman. And it's a joke in the movie. Yes, he's named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a Klansman. And they even show it's Tom Hanks playing the Klansman.
Yeah, in Birth of a Nation.
Well, I mean, he's founded the Klan. He's not just a Klansman. He's the
exactly. Thank you, Dylan. And the most insulting thing about this movie is that it came out the same year as Pulp Fiction and won Best Picture. How that happens, I honestly don't understand. This is a movie where I can feel that Robert Zemeckis was more interested in the technology that he was able to use than he was into actually telling a story that matters. That's why you have all the integration of Forrest through archive footage, and none of it looks good now. It's hard to believe that it looked good then because it's so dodgy. But
I don't know. Let me push back real quick. That's 1994, right? This is the year before like Toy Story. You know, that doesn't look bad for 30 years ago. Like that's about what you would expect a cheap movie to look like today. So I'll push back a little on that in Zemeckis' defense on the technology.
So you're saying that he was as interested in telling a story as he was in exploiting that technology?
No, I'm saying the technology looks pretty good. I'm agreeing with you that he was interested in the technology more than the story, but
he always kind of has
doesn't
been.
look bad.
Yeah, but if you look at something like Back to the Future Part 2, for instance, which is all technology, it's all process, they're doing things that haven't been done in movies narratively. It's not just doing things with new technology, but with Forrest Gump, it's a very familiar, hokey story. And I know Rob brought up my my previous comment of the minstrel show for people with mental illness, and I do pretty much believe that with the character of Forrest Gump, even though this is not mental illness we're talking about mental disability. But it's one of those things where I watched this movie for this case again with my mom, and she was bawling for the entire last 30 minutes of the movie. Like, it was starting to get to me, but I don't think it's because the movie was effective. I think it was because I was feeling her empathy radiating, and that was where I started getting caught up in it. But it's not a bad movie per se, but it's definitely not a good movie.
Interesting.
Dylan, where are you landing?
Well, I never really saw it when it was contemporary. I saw a lot when it was coming on in syndication. I always saw the bits and pieces, which is kind of not a bad way to watch it because the movie itself
is vignette-y.
It is. It's just a series of vignettes, so it was broken up easily on TNT frequently. So sitting down to watch it, I mean, I gotta say the movie emotionally hit me a lot more. I have so much trouble when it comes to people with mental illness, the way they're being portrayed and things, because my aunts were in that industry
spectrum?
for so long. No. They work. They were caregivers.
Okay.
So my entire childhood, I was around, mentally retarded people who would just have the kindest hearts. I mean, like, they're like the best. I'm getting a little choked up thinking about, like, these are such decent people.
Totally.
It kind of like in the spirit of Forrest. So I understand where you could say, like, oh, this isn't a good representation because he lives such a charmed life. Everything works out for him. There is this hint of kind of like a magical realism to it, and when the judge asks, like, is he a reliable narrator? It's not so much like, is he making this stuff up? But I think it goes more to Maynard's point of his point of view is just so maybe sanitized. You do lack that nuance, and which, Maynard used as a demerit, but I think was also part of the intentionality, though I am inclined to agree with the historical inaccuracies and how troubling those are. I mean, to give a fictional character the Medal of Honor, I mean, yeah, we see that, I guess, but, like, there's only a handful of people who have gotten the Medal of Honor in real life, and to make light of it. Yeah. So, like, the movie just treads a lot of weird lines for me emotionally, so I'm a bit all over the map on it, but so just kind of looking at the strengths of the cases, I mean, to Maynard's own admission, it was kind of nitpicky, but at the same time, it wasn't without value. He wasn't talking like, oh, in this scene, his, like, jacket was zipped and then it was unzipped the next scene. Bad movie. Like, he like
Zemeckis would never let that happen.
He probably
is a technical craftsman above all things. That would irritate the hell out of him.
That's true.
Did you interlock 30 teeth?
Yeah, exactly. So I do think some of those nitpicks are with merit and worth exploring. I do think the lack of nuance is something that can hurt this, and I appreciate that that's how he framed it. And then in what Brooks was saying, like, it is a feel-good movie. He did lead a charmed life. You're supposed to be walking out feeling better. And there's something to be said about that in movies and art. Art isn't always, it's supposed to be about the search for beauty sometimes. And sometimes it ends up looking like this. So, man, I'm really 50-50 because I love Maynard's case and I want to honor that. But also I feel like the movie was effective, and that's, so that's kind of where I'm at.
Ben,
you
you've
shadow
been
of the
pretty
doubt.
quiet.
Yeah, Ben, lay some stuff.
Because I'm saving
on
all
us.
my stuff for when I walk in.
Yeah, there's a lot to chew on here.
There is, yeah. I think the point that from the prosecution side that resonated the strongest with me is, like, sort of the right wingist thing. I was going with a different take on that. It seems like they were saying, like, Forrest, he's not aware of what's going on, and that seems to make him happier. Whereas, like, people who are aware of the situations they're in, who are protesting, who are angry, like, who follow the news cycle, are the people who are unhappy. So I think that's what it was going for, but I don't like that point. On the defense side, I do like Gary Sinise. I do like the music. The soundtrack is killer.
Great soundtrack.
Oh,
I do like
there's
how
90 too many needle drops in this movie. Literally 30 seconds does not go by without a fucking needle drop. It drove me insane.
Hey, they got me with Bob Seger, though. Against the Wind is a killer
For like
song.
15 seconds, and then it changes to Running on Empty by Jackson Brown. It's like,
which is
okay,
another banger.
Pick a lane and stick to it.
So yeah, the prosecutor is, like, nitpicky on history and that sort of thing, but I think there's something he's missing in, like, the philosophy of the movie, which is a message I disagree with, but at least that's what they're going for. They weren't trying to
I
make
like
the
the
film that the prosecutor was looking
anti-counterculture.
for.
I like the anti-counterculture message, but let's not get to
Wait,
it.
Dylan, you
Or
do?
Forrest Gump.
This is shocking.
I was gonna say.
No.
I know. That's gonna be the scandal from this one. I'm sorry, babe.
Also, Jenny is evil. She's evil.
She's punished, though. They gave her AIDS for being permit. Oh my god, it drives me. They punish her.
She has a kid with Forrest and doesn't
off.
tell him until she's, like, sick. Like, what kind of character is this?
She is not a character. She is a punching bag, and it is shameful the way they treat her.
It's my understanding treated a little more even-handedly in the novel, but we didn't hear a lot about the novel, though we did hear the acknowledgement that it exists.
The novel's not on trial here.
Also true. Also true.
Who wants to lock in? Ryan?
I'll lock in. Yeah, lock in. I agree with literally every single thing that Rob said. As he was talking, I was just like, "Yep, that's a point I have. Yep, yep, I, uh, I would say that this is a gentleman's five, but that is also me being generous because I think that the technological aspects cannot be overshadowed. Like this is very much a ones and zeros movie, and so I kind of admire it coming in an analog age, turning digital. And I can appreciate the craftsmanship behind the photography and all that stuff, but as a movie, I find it kind of rancid. So I'm gonna have to lock in guilty.
Dylan,
Amazing.
you locking that in and making it interesting, or are you gonna condemn it right now?
Man, that's because I was kind of I like I said, I'm very 50-50 because I do think the movie is more effective, like Ryan saying rancid. It's not that, but man, I'm gonna punt. I'm gonna say not guilty because I do think the movie succeeds in its intentionality. I do think it is a feel good movie. I do think Forrest is a good character that we're supposed to root for, and maybe it's too saccharine for some people, but I don't know. I think it hits you right. So I'm going not guilty, and I leave it in Big Ben's capable hands.
I'm with you as well. I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10 if I'm generous. It's probably closer to 50-50. But it does hit the notes it wants to. I just disagree with them. It is whimsical. It is charming. I can see why some people would adore it. So I'll go not guilty.
Oh,
So let's go tell that
Ben.
very handsome judge.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus Forrest Gump, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Boo! Lieutenant down!
The verdict is so rendered. Forrest Gump is free to go, and unlike a box of chocolates, I think we all knew exactly what we were getting here today. Court is adjourned.
I like that one.
This is Grumbly Grumblerson, the angriest reporter at the Gabagool Gazette, reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Maynard Bangs, I hate your face. Would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Well, I'm not surprised that the film about a simple man appealed to the two simple men in the jury. It doesn't really surprise me.
Hey!
And especially Big Ben, who is a coward and wouldn't come out and stand down the movie. So I'm not surprised, but I think everyone knows exactly what the right answer was here. So thanks, Grumbly.
Damn right. And here comes Brooks Eason. I've already forgotten if you won, not that I care. Excuse me, can we get a word on how you feel about today's verdict?
Well, first of all, I'm Brooks Eason. You could at least get that right.
Nope.
So I'm gratified by the verdict. I'm frankly shocked that it was a close call. I do think jury composition makes a lot of difference, and I think from my perspective, as an older Southern conservative guy, this movie resonates with me more than it does with people who don't have the benefits of the life I've led. And so I can understand, I suppose, why it was close, but I'm glad that Forrest Gump prevailed.
Thank you very much is what I would say if I liked you. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis. I'm just so angry.
What happened to you, Grumbly? Like, who
Grumbly
hurt
spent
you
the
in your
next
youth?
2 years, 3 months, and 14 hours running across the country screaming.
I think it's pretty consistent. I did look for holes in the music to see if they got some of the music times wrong, but
They did. They did frequently.
Did they actually?
Frequently,
because
yeah.
the one I checked was Running on Empty and then Against the Wind, and Running on Empty was 77, Against the Wind was 79, and it all worked for his cross country runs. So,
man, I love those songs.
I didn't question.
Well, great cases, both of you. I really liked it. Man, I love your closing though. That cracked me up.
Great music.
I do. And they should do all those extra things. He does some ridiculous things in the book, and apparently there is another book that they.
Yeah, Gump and Co.
Yeah, Gump and Co. And they were supposed to make another movie, and I think we're all happy that they didn't.
Well, 9/11 happened, and they're like, ooh.
I'm not sure that's all of it, but I would have stuck
It's part
Forrest
of it.
Gump in 9/11. I would have done
It's
that.
definitely part of it.
You know, that was my guilty verdict. I was going to call for a boot con where Gump survives 9/11, invest in Amazon,
I
and plays
want to
ping
talk
pong
to
with
Brooks.
Obama.
All right, Brooks.
Yes,
so
let's
what has
do
been
that.
keeping you busy? What do you do when you're not here defending movies in court?
I'm writing and walking my dogs and
same
goofing off. I'm a retired man now. I am no longer an active member of the bar, and so that chapter in my life is over, and I'm glad.
No,
So is this the point at which I talk about my new book? Is
of
that
course, absolutely.
Yes, let's
Okay,
hear about the new book.
My new book is entitled Trigger Warning. I realize this is not really a G-rated podcast, and somebody dropped an F-bomb a minute ago in anger about the movie. But anyway, Trigger Warning is stories from my career, life in the law, and the title and the cover illustration, which features a Palomino on the witness stand, were inspired by a sexual harassment case that I defended 25 years ago, I'm betting, in which a woman testified that a man was hung like a horse. And so,
yeah, you did tell us that one.
You told us that story on the Mike Husavini episode.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Who knows? Anyway, so the title of the book is Trigger Warning. It can be ordered from brookseason.com, which is easier to remember as brookseason.com, although I do have an S on the end of my name, but it's the same. If y'all have a minute, I can read you a 1-minute story that also includes profanity.
You won, so you could take as long as you want. You're the winner.
So this the title of this story is Don't Want No Raisins. One year during law school, Betsy Ann, that's my ex-wife, decided we should go on a health kick. That's usually a New Year's resolution kind of thing, but she chose the beginning of the fall semester for us to change our ways. We ate healthier, I exercised more, lost weight, and looked and felt better. Because we were trying to live healthy lives, BA decided everybody else in the world should too. She made an announcement in mid-October. Candy is unhealthy, she said, so we weren't going to give it away to trick-or-treaters on Halloween. I asked what we would give them instead. She had considered the matter and had the answer. The treats at our apartment would be miniature boxes of sun-made raisins. I tried to talk her out of it. One night of candy wasn't going to rot a kid's teeth or turn him into an obese diabetic, but she was resolute. Raisins it would be. Our apartment was a third-floor walk-up. The stairs were on the outside with landings between floors.
Oh, those poor kids.
When I came home at 5 o'clock on Halloween, Betsy Ann was already there. It was too early for trick-or-treaters, but we already had a pair. As I was heading up the stairs, 2 teenage boys were heading down. They were too old for trick-or-treating and weren't wearing costumes, but that didn't stop them. It was Halloween, and who doesn't love a Milky Way? When I reached the landing between the second and third floors, one of the boys was standing there, peering down into a grocery bag that had been repurposed as a treat collecting bag. He had a look of anger and disgust on his face. As I walked past, he pronounced his verdict without looking up. Raisins, raisins, he cried out to the Halloween gods. I don't want no motherfucking raisins. I didn't quibble with the young man, but instead walked into the apartment and repeated what I just heard. I could have said I told you so, but I let the trick-or-treaters' words do the talking. We went back to candy the following Halloween and all the ones that came after.
Wonderful.
You're lucky it was only angry words thrown. That's why you give.
I know.
Smart, because
I don't think he associated me with the raisins, but yes.
That's why you give raisins instead of apples, because apples do a whole lot more damage to windows.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
So you're smarter than you realized.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to be Nolan Ryan to break a window with a raisin.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book, Brooks. So far, my favorite story is We Don't Shoot the Clerks.
Yeah.
Which you'll have to buy the book and read it to find out why it's my favorite.
Fun.
Yeah, that one's extra.
Yes.
Exactly. And so we can get that from brookseason.com or Brooks Eason. which is easier to find, and so everyone should definitely go out and check it out. Now, we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So, Brooks, what is a movie that you think people should see?
I will recommend another Tom Hanks movie, Philadelphia, which I thought was wonderful. Another Boffo performance. He's top flight.
What's that about?
I think I got this. Surely y'all know this movie. He plays a gay lawyer who's been discriminated against. Am I wrong about the title? I mean,
No,
No,
you
that's
got
right,
it.
I believe.
You're right.
yeah, I think it's just the title is Philadelphia, I believe. But anyway, it's a very fine movie, and he's I believe he has AIDS in the movie, as I recall, and he's been ousted by his firm, and it's it's probably 20 years. It's probably not as old as Forrest Gump.
It's like
but-
The year before Forrest Gump. That was his first Oscar.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
like 92-ish, right? Yeah,
93.
93. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, it's trouble when people have got phones and they can look stuff up while you're talking.
Ryan
Nope.
just knows
Nope.
this.
No,
I
Ryan
promise
knows
He
you.
just
No,
knows.
That's in my head.
Ryan
Yeah.
knows that, and actually, they
Knows
never
every
explicitly
Tom Hanks
say
movie.
If Jenny gets AIDS or not. I think in the book it's supposed to be hepatitis C, but even then, it's supposed to be an unknown virus. So
Oh, you're right. Yeah, she does just say
there is
virus.
no official. The filmmakers want it to be AIDS, but I mean that opens a lot of other questions about. I mean, does Little Forrest have that now? But we don't have time to go through that. But Philadelphia is a good recommendation. Now let me take us from a trip down memory lane to a possible
Okay.
vision of the future. My
Ooh.
recommendation this week is Civil War from 2024. A team of embedded military journalists traverse the future war-torn dystopia of the United States on their way to interview the president himself, who is held up in the Capitol in D.C. If you stayed away from this film thinking it would lean into some kind of divisive politics, let me tell you, the coast is clear. This film is almost completely devoid of any political allegiance. Not only do you never find out what causes the Civil War, you never learn anything about what any faction values or stands for. It's never abundantly clear really who's the good guys and who's the bad, if something like that even exists in this future. The motives of the Civil War are red herring, and the real focus of the film is following the group of journalists who are boots on the ground in the unfolding chaotic landscape. And that's the film's biggest strength. The way it captures all the combat scenes makes you feel like you're there in the middle of the battle. It's a really excellent war movie in terms of how it captures this urban guerrilla sprawl and tactics. Don't think too much about the implausibility of this future, especially because the Civil War is shown to be based on geography, not ideology. Something we know would never happen in today's landscape. Come on, Texas and California are not working together unless it's to make the world's largest breakfast burrito. But to secede from and start their own nation together? I don't think so. Again, you have to kind of switch your mind off, but if you do, you'll be treated to a tense and unique type of war movie brought to us by our friends at A24. Schlender, what have you got for us?
Oh, well, thank you, Maynard. In keeping with tonight's movie, I'm recommending another film that takes place in the South, and that's 2019's Crawl. A collegiate swimmer returns to her childhood home to rescue her estranged father in the middle of the worst hurricane in recorded human history. The catch is there are angry alligators everywhere. The film is refreshingly straightforward, and you actually do care a little bit about our main characters. Yeah, they're jerks, but you don't want to see them get eaten. I am flummoxed at the R rating. It is purely a function of the swearing, as the gore is PG-13 level at best. This was a real missed opportunity for bigger exposure. Thankfully, my recommendation here will thrust it back into the spotlight. It is streaming on Pluto TV, but when I tried to watch it there, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom kept playing over it instead, which leads me to
Very
my
merciful.
real recommendation.
No, you only get one. You only get one. Everybody gets one. Real missed opportunity to call it Gator Cane. All right.
Ooh.
I like
I
it.
mean, the movie takes itself a little more seriously than you suspect.
you
but it's
think?
pretty good.
Ryan, what have you got for us?
My recommendation this week concerns one of my very favorite films, Starlet from 2012. Sean Baker has been amassing one hell of a filmography from Takeout to Tangerine, The Florida Project to Red Rocket, but this might stand as his low-key best picture. The film centers around Dree Hemingway in a star-making performance as a young porn actress who crosses paths with and befriends an 85-year-old woman. It's incredibly observed in ways that only Baker can deliver, and offers several slices of life that most of us will never encounter, which makes it valuable as a cultural document. Baker never judges his characters and permits the audience to engage on their individual terms, and I hope he keeps making these little movies until, let's say, 20 years from now, when Marvel finally convinces him to sell out and direct, let's say, Fantastic Four Part 3 or some bullshit. Starlet is currently streaming on, Dylan's gonna like this, Tubi and Canopy. Support your local library.
Outstanding recommendation, Ryan.
Yeah, no. How young of a porn star do you say?
Early 20s.
Well, okay. That's actually
just
middle-aged for a porn star. Yeah, she's getting up there in years.
In her golden years.
Send us on home.
As of this recording, I'm knee-deep in the online Japanese film festival, and I like to throw my support out for that, even though most of the films that they screen are not available on American streaming services at all, which is all the more reason to give their socials a follow so you can be in the loop for whatever they put out next year. I haven't finished all the films quite yet, but my favorite so far has been a romance film called We Made a Beautiful Bouquet. Japanese put a great emphasis on the lesson we learn from flowers that they're impermanent, their beauty exists, but it's temporary, which creates in us a sense of bittersweetness. But it's also a reminder to cherish the beautiful things while they're here. As a perpetually single person, I try really hard to avoid these films where the magic black rectangle that dominates my living room tries to convince me that love is possible. But this film beautifully captures the budding love that seems only possible in youth. The two characters were their own entities, yet for one moment in time, they were aligned. But, and this isn't a spoiler as the first scene reveals as much, they are destined to separate in the future. And you constantly fear that inevitable progression where they are both simultaneous to blame and not to blame as life outside of the home pulls them in different directions, causing them to lose touch with the beautiful innocence and completely open future that was once theirs for the taking. I would have made different choices than they made. I would play Zelda with Kasumi Arimura instead of work late night on a project 10 times out of 10. But as they drift away, they still feel in the same way, and their paths together are an integral part of who they are. It reminded me in a lot of ways of 500 Days of Summer, which wouldn't surprise me if that was some sort of inspiration for this one. So imagine that film, but where the girl actually kind of wanted to make it work with the guy for most of it. Man, I hate when that black rectangle makes me feel things. Screw you, magic rectangle. What kind of sicko watches things to be sad?
You've got one of those 2001 Space Odyssey obelisks in your living room?
And mine makes me sad, too. It also tells me to set fires.
You got to listen to that. Got to listen to those voices. No, great recommendation. And thank our guest, Brooks Eason, for joining us. Thank you so much, Brooks.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
We're going to go to brookseason.com or brookseason.com. It's easier to find. And we're going to check out your book. We hope to have you back again as well in the future.
Happy to do it.
We hope everyone else will join us again as well as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Named after a Klansman.
Klansman.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.